The call came just before dawn, when the world was still pretending nothing bad could happen yet. A woman lay at the bottom of her staircase, unresponsive, her body angled in a way that suggested gravity had done the work. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the house had already decided its role in the story. Quiet, orderly, almost respectful. No shattered frames, no overturned furniture. Just a stillness that pressed against the ears. Detective Marcus Hale stood in the foyer longer than protocol required. He let his eyes adjust, let the silence speak. In real accidents, Holmes felt startled, as if caught off guard by violence. This one felt prepared. The staircase rose in a clean, narrow line, each step immaculate, the banister polished by years of hands sliding down it. At the bottom, the woman lay twisted, her neck bent at an angle that made Hale's jaw tighten. She was in her late 30s, dressed in sleepwear that hadn't been rumpled by a struggle. Her phone rested a few feet away, screen dark. Paramedics murmured behind him, professional and subdued, already leaning toward the obvious explanation. People fell downstairs every day. Statistics were comforting that way. The man standing near the kitchen doorway did not cry. Not yet. He held his arms close to his body, fingers interlaced, as if afraid of what might happen if he let them drift apart. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, rehearsed in the way grief sometimes was when it arrived early. He said her name once, softly, then again louder, as though volume might summon her back. Hale noted how the man positioned himself, not too close to the body, not too far. He knew where to stand. That was the thought that lingered, unwelcome and persistent. People in shock wandered. They collapsed. They reached. This man remained composed, eyes flicking to the staircase, then away, as if he already understood what it would and would not give him. Accident? One of the uniforms asked quietly. Hale didn't answer right away. He crouched near the first step, careful not to disturb anything. There was a faint smear along the edge of the banister, easy to miss, easier to dismiss. He felt it then, that subtle resistance in his chest, the sense that the scene was telling a story too clean to be true. The house offered no witnesses, no noise, no chaos. It simply waited. Hale straightened, finally meeting the man's eyes. They were dry, glassy, reflecting the staircase behind him like a mirror he couldn't escape. "Tell me what you remember," Hale said. The man inhaled, steadying himself, and began at the beginning, exactly where someone who had practiced would. As his words filled the quiet, Hale understood one thing with unsettling clarity. Whatever had happened here, the silence had been part of it. Outside, the sky lightened by degrees, a pale blue creeping in through the windows, illuminating details no one had noticed yet. Hale knew the next hours would be filled with routine questions, condolences, and paperwork designed to smooth tragedy into something manageable. But as the man continued speaking, perfectly measured, Hale felt the case leaning forward, waiting for the moment when composure would crack and something truer would surface. Soon enough, it did. Detective Hale let the man talk, because practiced stories often revealed themselves in their pacing. He nodded at the right places, murmured acknowledgments meant to keep the flow uninterrupted. The man said he'd heard a thud from upstairs, heavy but brief, the kind of sound a house makes when it settles. By the time he reached the staircase, she was already there. Too late. Always too late. The name was Daniel Reed. Husband. 9 years married. He said the words like credentials, offering them up before Hale could ask. As he spoke, his gaze drifted to the same spots again and again. The fourth step from the bottom, the light switch near the hallway, the edge of the rug that framed the foyer. Not random. Familiar. Uniformed officers moved through the house, soft-footed, cataloging surfaces and corners. Daniel shifted just enough to stay out of their way, instinctively navigating the space like someone guiding guests through a home tour. Hale noticed how he never once blocked the staircase, as if preserving it for someone else. Or something. A neighbor stood outside, wrapped in a robe and curiosity, whispering fragments to an officer. They'd heard raised voices the night before. Or maybe a television. It was hard to be sure. Another neighbor remembered seeing the victim earlier that evening, carrying groceries, smiling tiredly. Ordinary details, The kind that built a life even as it ended. Hale asked Daniel when he'd last spoken to his wife. The answer came without pause. Midnight. A small disagreement, nothing serious. She'd gone upstairs. He'd stayed down, fallen asleep on the couch. The words lined up neatly, one after the other, like items on a shelf. Do you want to sit? Hale asked. Daniel shook his head. I'm fine here. He was standing near the kitchen doorway again, exactly where he'd been when Hale first arrived. Grief usually wandered, searching for anchors. Daniel had already found his. The medical examiner pronounced time of death with careful neutrality. An accident was still the working assumption, and no one challenged it aloud. Yet Hale felt the growing weight of small impressions piling up, none decisive on their own, all whispering the same doubt. In the living room, Hale spotted a framed photograph turned face down on a side table. He didn't touch it. Instead, he asked Daniel about it casually, as if it were nothing. Daniel glanced over, hesitated a fraction too long, then said it must have fallen during the night. Houses made noise, he reminded them. Things shifted. Outside, the sun had fully risen, revealing the home in unflattering clarity. Clean windows. Trim hedges. A life arranged to look complete. As officers prepared to clear the scene, Hale made a decision that felt both premature and inevitable. He requested a full forensic review. Daniel nodded when he heard, acceptance sliding easily into place. Of course, he said. Whatever you need. The words were generous, cooperative. They should have reassured Hale. Instead, as Daniel stepped aside once more, making room with practiced grace, Hale felt the unease sharpen. Grief, he thought, didn't usually know where to stand. And soon, the staircase would start answering questions the people wouldn't. As the body was prepared for transport, Daniel finally lowered himself into a chair, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on nothing. It looked like surrender, but Hale read it differently. It was relief at reaching a cue he recognized. The house exhaled again, and Hale stayed behind a moment longer, certain the quiet had more to say. He suspected the silence was rehearsing truths no one wanted. The house emptied slowly, like a held breath finally released. By late morning, only crime scene tape and the quiet hum of forensic equipment remained. Detective Hale stood at the base of the staircase again, watching technicians move up and down its length with measured care. In daylight, it looked harmless. Narrow, carpeted, gently curved at the top. The kind of staircase people fell down all the time. Forensic specialist Lena Ortiz knelt beside the banister, gloved fingers hovering just above the wood. There's transfer here, she said, not looking up. Not much. Enough to matter. Hale crouched beside her. The faint smear he'd noticed earlier was clearer now, a disrupted polish rather than an obvious stain. Ortiz explained it calmly, clinically. Skin contact. Pressure applied downward, not sliding. It didn't scream violence. It whispered intention. They worked in silence for several minutes, photographing, measuring, mapping angles. Hale listened to the quiet differently now. It wasn't empty. It was restrained, like a room after an argument where nothing had been resolved. At the top of the stairs, a technician paused. Sir, he called. You should see this. The carpet on the upper landing showed compressed fibers, flattened in a way that suggested weight held in place, not motion passing through. No drag marks. No scramble. Just a pause. A moment where something stopped before continuing. Could be nothing, Ortiz said, though her tone lacked conviction. Or it could be exactly what it looks like. Hale imagined the final seconds unfolding backward. A body didn't tumble the way they'd assumed. It hesitated. That was the problem. Falls were chaotic. This was contained. Downstairs, the medical examiner's preliminary notes arrived. Cause of death, cervical fracture consistent with a fall. No defensive wounds. No alcohol in the system. Too clean. Hale rubbed his thumb against his jaw, feeling the friction ground him. Check the step edges, he said. Any impact points? They found one. A small indentation halfway down, inconsistent with the final resting position of the body. The geometry didn't line up. Something had been adjusted after the fact, even if only by inches. Ortiz straightened, exhaling through her mask. "The evidence doesn't match the scene," she said quietly. Hale felt the phrase settle into him, heavy and undeniable. Accidents left messes. This had been curated. Upstairs, they moved into the bedroom. The bed was made. Too tight. Hospital corners on a night meant for sleep. Hale opened the nightstand drawer. Inside lay a phone charger neatly coiled, no phone attached. The device found downstairs hadn't been charging. A detail. Irritating. They logged it anyway. As the hours passed, the house gave up more fragments. A trash bag tied carefully, containing nothing unusual. A sink wiped clean. No signs of a struggle, but also no signs of life interrupted. It was as if the night had been erased and rewritten. Hale stepped outside to call it in. As he spoke, he watched Daniel read across the street, standing with a neighbor, hands clasped, posture composed. Even now, he knew where to stand. When Hale returned inside, Ortiz was labeling evidence bags. "If this was staged," she said, "it wasn't rushed." Hale nodded. He thought of the flattened carpet. The pause. The hesitation before the fall. Someone had made a decision there. As they sealed the scene, Hale glanced once more at the staircase, now stripped of mystery and comfort. It had told its story without words, and it was nothing like the one they'd been given. He knew cases like this never broke open all at once. They cracked slowly, under pressure, until one small truth slipped free and changed everything forever for everyone involved, including those who thought they were safe. By the time the house was released, it felt smaller, as if the investigation had compressed its walls inward. Detective Hale stayed behind with boxes of logged items, walking room to room with a growing awareness that absence could be louder than presence. Staged scenes often hid their secrets in what they removed, not what they left behind. He started in the living room. Surfaces were immaculate, shelves dusted, remote controls aligned. Too careful. On the mantel sat 3 framed photographs, a vacation beach shot, a holiday dinner, a posed anniversary portrait. Hale noticed the spacing immediately. There was room for a 4th frame, the dust outline faint but unmistakable. Something had been taken, not lost. Upstairs, the bedroom offered the same restraint. Closets were orderly, clothes grouped by color and season. Hale opened drawers slowly, feeling like an intruder in a life that had been edited. Jewelry boxes contained only practical pieces. No sentimental clutter. No impulsive mess. The kind of room shaped by compromise rather than comfort. Financial documents lay in a file folder inside the desk, not hidden, not displayed. Hale scanned them. Mortgage current. Utilities paid. Nothing that suggested desperation. But tucked between statements was a folded envelope addressed in the victim's handwriting. Empty. Whatever it once held had been removed with care. He carried the folder downstairs, where Ortiz was finishing her final walkthrough. "Anything jump out?" she asked. "Too much order," Hale said. "And a few things missing." They compared notes. No laptop recovered. No personal journal. No secondary phone. Daniel had mentioned none of these when asked about her belongings. Either he hadn't noticed, or he'd already accounted for their absence. Hale returned to the kitchen, opening cabinets at random. Everything was stocked, labels facing outward. A calendar hung on the fridge, days crossed off neatly. The last note written in blue ink read, "Talk tonight." No names. No follow-up. Just a reminder frozen in time. Outside, a moving truck idled down the street, ordinary life pressing on. Hale stepped onto the porch and called Daniel over. The man approached with the same measured pace, face composed but pale. "Did your wife keep a laptop?" Hale asked. Daniel blinked once. "She did. For work. We didn't find it." The pause. Brief but real. "She must have taken it with her," Daniel said. "She sometimes worked late upstairs." "And a journal?" Hale added. "Anything she wrote in privately?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not that I know of." Hale let the silence stretch. Daniel filled it by straightening his sleeves, an unnecessary adjustment. "Is something wrong?" he asked finally. "Just making sure we understand her routines," Hale replied. "Sometimes missing things tell us more than what's left behind." Daniel nodded, acceptance returning quickly. She was private, he said. Liked to keep things to herself. After he left, Hale stood on the porch, replaying the exchange. Privacy could be protection. Or preparation. Back inside, Ortiz handed him a final inventory list. Hale scanned it twice. The missing items formed a pattern now, faint but emerging. Whatever the victim had been holding on to, she hadn't intended to keep it here. As the door closed behind them, Hale imagined the house before that final night, filled with routines that looked harmless from the outside. He wondered who else knew what was missing, who might have been trusted with pieces the home could no longer contain. Somewhere beyond these walls, someone had heard her speak more freely. And finding that person, Hale knew, would change the direction of everything. Detective Hale didn't wait long to follow the thread he'd uncovered. Missing things suggested shared trust, not secrecy kept in isolation. People preparing to leave didn't erase themselves completely. They distributed pieces of the truth where they thought it would be safe. Hale started with phone records, then moved outward, tracing patterns instead of names. The first break came quietly. A number appeared repeatedly in the victim's call log over the past 3 months, always late, always brief. Not a coworker. Not family. When Hale requested the subscriber information, the delay felt heavier than usual, as if the case itself understood what was coming. The woman's name was Marissa Cole. Mid-30s. No criminal history. Worked part-time at a community arts center across town. Hale drove there in the early afternoon, the city moving around him with indifferent rhythm. Inside, the building smelled faintly of paint and old wood. Marissa was easy to spot. She looked like someone who had been bracing for impact for a long time. She didn't deny knowing the victim. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around a paper cup of water, knuckles white. "I was afraid this would happen," she said, before Hale could even sit down. The words fell out as confession, not accusation. Hale listened. He always did. Marissa described a connection that had started small and careful. Conversations after workshops. Messages sent and deleted. The kind of closeness built in whispers rather than declarations. It wasn't passion that defined it, she insisted, but relief. The victim had spoken about feeling watched in her own home, measured against expectations she could never quite meet. She said she was tired, Marissa said, voice cracking. Not just tired. Trapped. Hale asked if she'd ever felt in danger. Marissa nodded slowly. She didn't say it outright. She didn't have to. She told me she was planning something. Leaving a... She asked if she could stay with me for a while. Her eyes filled. I told her yes. The last conversation replayed itself between them in fragments. A voice message sent late at night. The victim sounded hesitant but resolved. She said she'd talk to her husband soon. She said she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She said, if something happens, you need to know it wasn't an accident. Hale felt the weight of that sentence settle deep. He asked if Marissa had told anyone else. She shook her head. Fear had kept her quiet. Guilt kept her shaking. Back in his car, Hale sat for a long moment before starting the engine. The pieces were aligning now, not cleanly, but convincingly. A private plan. A missing refuge. A truth shared just enough to survive beyond the victim herself. He returned to the station and added Marissa's statement to the file, careful, methodical. He replayed Daniel's calm cooperation in his mind, the way acceptance slid too easily into place. Knowledge changed behavior. Secrets reshaped posture. Someone aware of an impending departure might act very differently than someone caught off guard. That evening, Hale requested the victim's deleted messages be recovered. He ordered a deeper financial review, not for desperation but for preparation. Quiet accounts. Travel searches. Anything that suggested an exit not yet taken. As night fell, Hale stood by the window of his office, city lights flickering below. He thought of the staircase again, the hesitation at the top. Decisions made in silence often left echoes louder than screams. Somewhere between fear and resolve, the victim had chosen to tell someone the truth. That choice had kept it alive after her death. And now, Hale understood, the investigation was no longer about reconstructing a fall. It was about unraveling the forces that made leaving feel more dangerous than staying. In that space, where love blurred into control, the real crime began to take shape. By the time Detective Hale began reconstructing the marriage, the case had shifted its center of gravity. It was no longer anchored to the staircase, but to the space around it, the emotional architecture that had shaped every choice leading up to that night. He started with messages, recovered slowly, reluctantly, like truths that didn't want to be seen. Daniel Reed's texts were not violent. That was the unsettling part. They were careful, attentive, wrapped in concern. Questions about where she was, when she'd be home, whether she'd eaten. Compliments followed corrections. Apologies followed reminders. Love, threaded tightly with supervision. Hale read them twice. Control didn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it whispered until the whisper became the only sound left. Marissa's messages, by contrast, were light, almost tentative. Short check-ins. Jokes softened by caution. There was no urgency, no demand. Just space. The difference between the two exchanges was stark enough to feel physical. Hale interviewed coworkers next. They described the victim as capable, reliable, increasingly withdrawn. Someone who stopped joining lunches, who took calls outside, who flinched when her phone buzzed unexpectedly. One colleague remembered her saying, half joking, "It's easier if I just explain myself before anyone asks." At home, Daniel framed his concern as devotion. He handled finances to reduce stress. He discouraged late nights for her safety. He preferred surprises planned in advance. Over time, these preferences hardened into rules no one had agreed to but everyone followed. Hale sat with Daniel again, this time in an interview room stripped of warmth. Daniel remained composed, polite, almost eager to clarify misunderstandings. When Hale asked about the messages, Daniel didn't deny them. "I was protecting her," he said. "She was sensitive. She needed structure." "Did she agree?" Hale asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "She didn't have to. She trusted me." That word lingered, heavy and misused. Hale pressed gently, letting silence do its work. He asked about the argument the night she died. Daniel described it as brief, emotional but contained. She'd said she felt suffocated. He'd said she was overreacting. He'd told her she was imagining distance where there was none. Gaslighting rarely announced itself. It rewrote reality one sentence at a time. Hale watched Daniel's posture as he spoke. Upright. Certain. A man used to being believed. When Hale mentioned Marissa, Daniel's composure flickered. Not anger. Calculation. "So she told you stories," Daniel said. "That's unfortunate." "Stories don't usually come with exit plans," Hale replied. Daniel's jaw tightened. She wasn't leaving. But she was thinking about it. The pause. Then, quieter, "Everyone thinks about leaving sometimes." Hale ended the interview there. Pushing further would only drive Daniel inward, where rehearsed truths waited. What mattered now was pattern, not confession. Late that night, Hale reviewed the victim's voice messages to Marissa. Her tone shifted over time, from hesitant to resolved. The final message was different. Slower. Measured. She sounded like someone preparing for fallout. "He won't let me go easily," she'd said. "But I can't stay." Hale closed the file, feeling the weight of inevitability settle in. Control thrived in private, but it unraveled under scrutiny. The victim's plan hadn't been reckless. It had been necessary. Leaving wasn't betrayal. It was survival. As Hale turned off his office light, he thought again of the staircase, the pause at the top. Control lost its grip in moments like that, when obedience failed. Whatever happened next hadn't been an accident. It had been a response. And soon, Hale knew, the case would move from patterns to pressure, from understanding to confrontation. The night would be replayed again, not as Daniel described it, but as it truly unfolded. The night refused to exist as a single narrative. Detective Hale rebuilt it in fragments, piecing together digital timestamps, neighbor recollections, and the subtle residue of emotion left behind. Each version overlapped without aligning, like transparencies stacked just wrong enough to blur the truth. According to Daniel, the argument ended quietly. Voices lowered. Doors closed. According to recovered messages, The victim stopped replying at 11:42 p.m., mid-sentence, the unfinished thought hanging like a held breath. The television downstairs registered activity until shortly after midnight, then silence. Hale walked the staircase again, this time imagining sound instead of sight. A raised voice wouldn't echo here. A shove wouldn't need momentum. Control often expressed itself in proximity, not force. The pause at the landing mattered more than the fall itself. A neighbor reported hearing a dull thud around 12:18. Not a crash. Not panic. Just something final enough to notice, forget, then remember when asked. The timestamp fit too neatly to ignore. Hale replayed the scene backward. The victim at the top, resolved but afraid. Daniel close enough to hear her breathing change. Words exchanged that weren't meant to wound but did. She turned away. He followed. The staircase waited. There was no evidence of a struggle because there hadn't been one. Just resistance. Just refusal. A body hesitating, then losing balance as space collapsed behind it. Gravity finished what intention began. Downstairs, Daniel's movements were precise. The phone relocated. The body adjusted. The house returned to order. Grief rehearsed in the quiet hours before dawn, while the world still slept. Hale studied Daniel's call activity that night. One unanswered call to voicemail. One deleted outgoing message never sent. Fear didn't always shout. Sometimes it drafted words and erased them. By early morning, the story had hardened into performance. Daniel stood where he should. Said what he could. Let the staircase speak for him. But structures remembered pressure long after people forgot. Hale closed his eyes and let the fragments align. Not into certainty, but into shape. This hadn't been rage. It had been containment failing. The moment she chose movement over compliance, the balance broke. The night, once scattered, now pointed inward. Toward a confrontation too intimate for witnesses, too controlled for chaos. Hale opened his eyes, knowing the next step would not be forensic, but human. Someone would have to sit across from Daniel again, apply pressure, and watch which fragments cracked. He understood the danger of that moment. Confrontations rearranged memory, sharpened defenses, turned uncertainty into armor. Daniel would arrive prepared, carrying grief like a credential and cooperation like a shield. Hale would need patience, not accusation, listening more than speaking, waiting for the fractures to reveal themselves. Truth rarely appeared when summoned. It surfaced when pressure met exhaustion. Hale gathered the file, the fragments now ordered enough to be useful. The night no longer felt distant or abstract. It pressed close, warm with breath and fear. He imagined the victim's final choice again, not as weakness but as courage, a refusal to remain small. That decision had tipped everything forward. As he left the office, the city settled into its own quiet rhythm, lights dimming, streets thinning. Somewhere, Daniel Reed was likely rehearsing too, refining his version until it fit comfortably. Hale knew that comfort would be the lever. The next conversation would not revisit the staircase or the fall. It would return to control, to the moment obedience ended. And when it did, the fragments of that night would finally be forced into a single, dangerous story. He paused outside, breathing in the cold air, letting resolve replace doubt. Tomorrow would demand calm persistence and careful listening. The case was ready to move from reconstruction to resistance. Daniel would feel it soon. And when pressure tightened, something rehearsed would falter, revealing the truth hidden beneath practiced silence. Nothing else in the house would protect him anymore now. Pressure changed the way evidence behaved. Once the case shifted from theory to confrontation, details that had seemed passive began asserting themselves. Detective Hale felt it as he reopened files, reread reports, and listened again to recordings that had already been catalogued. The truth wasn't new. It was simply tired of being ignored. The lab results arrived first. Subtle, precise, devastating in their restraint. Fibers recovered from the victim's sleeve matched the weave of Daniel's sweater from that night. Not unusual in a marriage, except for placement. The fibers were concentrated near the shoulder and upper arm, where someone might grip, not embrace. Context turned coincidence into accusation. Next came the phone analysis. The victim's device showed a brief burst of motion just after midnight, inconsistent with a fall. It suggested handling. Orientation changed. The phone had been moved, then placed face down. Hale pictured the moment clearly now. Silence restored by intention. Ortiz joined Hale in the evidence room, laying out photographs side by side. The staircase indentation. The flattened carpet. The banister transfer. Individually, they explained themselves away. Together, they formed a sequence. Not violence, but correction. Not rage, but control reasserting itself too late. The scene didn't fail, Ortiz said quietly. It was overwritten. Hale nodded. That was the word. Someone had edited reality, assuming no one would check the margins. Financial records added weight. A savings account opened in the victim's name alone. Small deposits, regular, deliberate. Not enough to flee dramatically, but enough to leave carefully. Daniel hadn't known about it. Or if he hadn't mentioned it. Then there was the voicemail. Recovered from the carrier server, it was a draft never sent, time-stamped minutes before the neighbor's reported thud. The victim's voice was low, controlled, shaking only at the edges. "I'm going to talk to him now," she said. "If I don't call back, it means it didn't go the way he promised." No names. No accusation. Just awareness. Hale sat back, letting the room settle. Evidence like this didn't shout. It refused silence by existing at all. Daniel's version had depended on isolation, on each fact standing alone and seeming harmless. Now they leaned toward each other, conspiring. Hale prepared for the next interview carefully. He didn't bring everything. He never did. He brought just enough to disrupt comfort. Just enough to suggest inevitability. Daniel arrived composed, grief neatly arranged. He listened as Hale spoke, eyes steady, hands folded. When Hale mentioned the fibers, Daniel nodded. When Hale described the phone movement, Daniel frowned slightly, as if trying to remember. The voicemail changed that. Daniel's breath caught. Not dramatically. Just enough. She was emotional, Daniel said. She exaggerated when she was stressed. Stress doesn't open bank accounts, Hale replied. Or draft goodbye messages. The room tightened. Daniel leaned back, reassessing. Control adjusted when challenged. Hale recognized the shift. Defense was giving way to calculation. Hale ended the interview without accusation. He didn't need a confession yet. What mattered was momentum. Evidence had found its voice, and Daniel had heard it. As Daniel was escorted out, Hale gathered the files, feeling the case settle into a new phase. Silence had protected the lie. Now sound was returning, layered and persistent. The next step wouldn't be about proving what happened on the stairs. It would be about motive made undeniable, about confronting the cost of truth in public. Hale knew trials weren't built on certainty alone, but on narrative strong enough to withstand attack. And now, finally, the story was ready to be told. Daniel Reed returned for the third interview without a lawyer, a choice that surprised no one who had watched him closely. Control depended on proximity, and attorneys introduced distance. He greeted Hale politely, sat where indicated, folded his hands. The mask was still in place, but it fit tighter now. Hale began softly, reviewing timelines Daniel already knew. He asked about dinner, the television, the couch. Daniel answered smoothly, voice even. When Hale mentioned the voicemail, Daniel's eyes flicked once to the door, then back. A recalibration, quick and practiced. "You didn't know she planned to leave," Hale said, not a question. Daniel smiled thinly. "She dramatized things." Hale let the silence stretch. "She opened an account. She asked a friend for shelter." The smile faded. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You're misreading concern as confinement," he said. "I kept her safe." "Safe from what?" Hale asked. Daniel exhaled, irritation seeping through composure. "From herself. She spiraled. She needed guidance." "Guidance." Hale repeated the word silently, then set down photographs. Fibers. Carpet. Banister. He didn't explain them. He watched Daniel recognize them instead. "That night," Hale said, "she told you she was leaving." Daniel's jaw worked. "She said she was confused." And you corrected her. The room held its breath. Daniel straightened, authority returning by reflex. I told her the truth. Hale nodded. That you decide what's true. Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. You make it sound sinister. It sounds practiced, Hale said. The mask slipped not in anger, but in certainty. Daniel's voice hardened. I loved her. She would have ruined her life chasing fantasies. I stopped that. How? Hale asked. Daniel's eyes flashed. I didn't push her, he said quickly. Too quickly. She lost her balance. Hale waited. After you blocked her path. Daniel froze. The correction landed. His shoulders dropped a fraction, the first visible surrender. I reached for her, he said, to calm her down. On the landing, Hale said, where the carpet is flattened. Daniel swallowed. She panicked. And you fixed the scene, Hale said gently, because control had failed. Daniel's hands unclasped, fingers flexing. I cleaned, he said. I thought if it looked normal, she'd be remembered normally. Hale felt the shift complete. Not confession, but admission of motive wrapped in justification. You moved her phone. So no one would think she was afraid, Daniel said. She wasn't. Hale stood. You were. The room fell quiet. Daniel looked smaller now, the certainty leaking away. I didn't mean to hurt her, he said, voice thin. I know, Hale replied. You meant to keep her. Daniel lowered his head. The mask lay broken between them, pieces sharp with truth. Hale signaled for the officer. As Daniel was let out, he didn't resist. He just asked, will they understand? Hale watched the door close. Understanding wasn't the goal. Accountability was. Outside the room, Hale exhaled slowly. The case had crossed its threshold. What remained would be colder, louder, public. The story would move from interviews to indictments, from controlled rooms to open court. He gathered the files, already arranging them for trial, where truth paid for itself in years and names. Justice would come with a cost, and everyone would feel it. The mask was gone. Now the reckoning could begin. He knew the courtroom would demand restraint, that every motive would be stripped of emotion and weighed aloud. Witnesses would remember too late, defend themselves, fail again. Daniel would watch from a table, control reduced to posture and whispers to counsel. Hale felt no triumph, only resolve. Justice would not heal the damage, but it would name it. Tomorrow, the story would leave his office and enter public record, where truth demanded witnesses and consequences followed names. He closed the file, ready to let the reckoning unfold under lights that allowed no shadows left to hide from anyone ever again. Then the courtroom smelled of varnish and polished wood, a scent Hale had come to associate with finality. The case, once confined to staircases and whispers, had grown wings of legal language, procedural rigor, and public expectation. Daniel Reed sat at the defendant's table, expression carefully neutral, hands folded, rehearsed grief in place. The mask might have shifted, but performance endured in courts as well as living rooms. Hale observed from the gallery, watching how the trial reshaped relationships and emotions alike. Witnesses repeated their statements, measured under oath. Neighbors, colleagues, friends, each carefully recounting fragments that had once seemed inconsequential. The staircase, the flattened carpet, the misplaced phone, all described in precise, clinical language. Yet the words carried weight. Every observer, every jury member, sensed the tension behind the syllables. Marissa Cole testified first. Her voice, steady at first, trembled as she recounted the final conversations with the victim. She was planning to leave, she said, eyes briefly meeting Hale's. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what she couldn't control. Murmurs rippled through the room. Hale nodded slightly. This was what he had waited for, truth delivered with clarity, without embellishment. Daniel's attorney attempted to frame the evidence as misinterpreted concern, protective instincts taken too literally. But the jury's attention shifted every time Hale's collected exhibits were presented. Phone messages, fibers, the flattened stair carpet, the carefully edited environment. Evidence that had once whispered now demanded acknowledgement. Daniel took the stand eventually, carefully rehearsed, calm, protective of his version. He recounted the night as a miscalculated intervention. He insisted on care, on intent without malice. Hale listened quietly, noting every hesitation, every micro-expression betraying internal conflict. The man had maintained composure under scrutiny, yet the cracks were visible to those trained to observe patterns. Cross-examination brought it into sharper focus. The voicemails, the deleted messages, the financial records, all pointed to deliberate concealment, planning, control. Each piece weighed against Daniel's insistence that it had been a tragic accident. The courtroom felt taut, ready to snap with every contradiction. Hale could see it reflected in the jury's posture, leaning forward, eyes tracking the smallest behavioral cues. Outside, reporters whispered and clicked, the public appetite for narrative intensifying. Inside, the case was stripped of narration, reduced to actions, words, and corroboration. Emotions were present only as evidence could confirm them. Hale realized the trial itself was a test not of guilt, which was already apparent, but of comprehension, whether intent, premeditation, and psychological pressure could be measured in testimony and exhibits. The prosecution's closing argument distilled months of investigation into a cohesive story. Control disguised as love, isolation maintained through subtle coercion, evidence edited to preserve appearances. Hale listened as the story he had pieced together was translated for strangers, presented as undeniable sequence. Justice here relied on clarity, not emotion. Daniel's defense tried to counter with compassion, portraying a caring husband misjudged by circumstance. Hale watched the jury absorb, question, and evaluate. The staircase, once intimate and silent, now existed in every mind as evidence, a witness both literal and symbolic. When the jury finally retired, Hale stepped outside. The chill air was heavy with anticipation. He thought of Marissa, of the victim, of control and its consequences. The trial itself had been procedural, almost mechanical. But the emotional toll on witnesses, family, and Hale himself was deeper than any courtroom procedure could address. Verdict awaited, but Hale already knew the hardest work was not in the judge's instruction or the jury's deliberation. The hardest part had been watching private grief and psychological entanglements laid bare, measured against law and fact, and knowing that outcomes would name consequences but could never restore what was lost. He returned to his office, files in hand, preparing for the final step. The courtroom had translated evidence into language, but the human reckoning, the aftermath, would demand patience, reflection, and confrontation with the scars left behind. This part, Hale realized, would be longer than any trial, and no verdict could shorten it. The courtroom emptied, chairs scraping lightly against the polished floor. Detective Hale lingered at the edge of the gallery, letting the hum of muted conversations and shuffling papers fill the space. The verdict had been delivered. Daniel Reed would face the consequences, but the resolution offered no relief, only the stark awareness that truth rarely healed cleanly. It left its own traces. Outside, the sun struck the courthouse steps, indifferent to the lives it illuminated. Families and friends clustered together, offering embraces that were half comfort, half ritual. Hale watched Marissa Cole approach, shoulders tight, face pale but resolute. She had carried the victim's secret in her chest for months, and now it was public, raw, and unyielding. Hale felt a pang of recognition, the cost of knowing, the weight of survival. Inside his office later, Hale reviewed the case one final time. Every file, every photograph, every voice recording represented more than evidence. It was a ledger of choices, of control, of fear, and of courage. The staircase, the flattened carpet, the displaced phone, the fibers, all had spoken in their own ways. They had told a story that no one could fully contain, and yet the people involved had to live with the fragments that remained. Daniel's trial had clarified guilt, but it hadn't erased questions, regrets, or private reckonings. Hale considered the husband's carefully maintained composure, the meticulous order he had imposed on life and home, and the subtle violence of control disguised as love. Even now, after judgment, Daniel's posture and words revealed the tension between responsibility and denial, between intention and consequence. Marissa had left a note on Hale's desk, brief but deliberate. Thank you for listening. For noticing. It was a reminder that some truths were carried quietly, that vigilance mattered, that small acts could preserve lives beyond the immediate tragedy. Hale folded it carefully, recognizing the unspoken depth behind the gesture. He thought of the victim, whose voice still lingered in fragments of voicemails and hurried messages. Her final choice, to tell someone to leave a trace, had been an act of defiance and foresight. It had allowed the investigation to uncover what staged appearances could never hide. It had preserved integrity in a world that had nearly silenced her. Outside his office window, traffic moved like a river indifferent to sorrow. Hale realized that time would not erase what had happened. The physical scars were minimal, but the emotional ones remained, layered in the people who survived and in the spaces they once inhabited. Relationships had been irrevocably altered, trust fractured, and understanding forever complicated by the shadow of control and fear. As night fell, Hale walked the streets slowly, letting the weight of the investigation settle around him. Every lighted window reminded him that private lives carried private dangers, and that vigilance, empathy, and attention to subtle signals were essential. Truth had been uncovered, justice served, but the residual pain would persist in ways law could never measure. Hale returned home, exhausted, yet resolute. He understood that the detective's work never truly ended. Cases were closed on paper, but the human elements, the whispers, the secrets, the emotional landscapes, persisted. He took a deep breath and considered the staircase one last time, picturing it as it had been that night. A place of hesitation, a moment where control faltered, and a truth began to emerge. The case files were locked away, but the lessons remained. He would carry them, alert to the quiet signs, the small anomalies, the behaviors that spoke louder than words. Justice had been delivered, but truth left its scars, indelible, necessary, and always present. Hale sat back, letting the silence fill the room, aware that while the world moved on, the echoes of this story would linger in ways no one could undo.